I was trying to think of a metaphor for the tax debate, and all I could come up with was sort of a mud fight. You know, if you think, for the last 3 decades, we've been reducing taxes on millionaires steadily. And yet, when we have a discussion about whether we should reverse those tax cuts, that whole debate is sort of locked down or talked about in terms of class warfare. And what I want to talk to you about tonight is, can we find a way to have a conversation, a new way of thinking about the role of taxes and wealth and the role of the society in helping create wealth? You know, when people talk about class warfare, I don't really get very excited about that, and let me tell you why. You see, I'm the great-grandson of the meatpacker Oscar Mayer. So I was born on third base. I grew up in the top 1%. I won the lottery at birth. And as my father used to say, bringing home the bacon has a different meaning in our family. It really stuck out when I got my first car. You see, I don't dislike wealthy people. I don't hate them. They're my family. They're the people I know, the neighbors I grew up with, many of whom were quite hardworking, innovative, and were the kind of do-something people. They were the people who, if you had a problem, you went to and they figured out a solution. In our family, the Oscar Mayer, our family didn't have this kind of antagonism toward government and taxes. It's interesting, my great-grandfather was actually lobbied for the meatpacking inspections to get government involved in meatpacking. Think of Upton Sinclair and the Jungle and the exposés about the meatpacking industry. Our family was out front saying government needs to get involved here and clean up meatpacking. My great-grandfather had an 11-word philosophy for life. He said, lifelong personal development, generous consideration for others, due service to society. So when I think about a new way of thinking, maybe it's really an old way of thinking that some of my ancestors talked about, due service to society. The other thing I have to tell you is the other branch of my family, the Collinses, a little bit hot-headed. Some of us are related to Michael Collins, the Irish revolutionary. So basically, German meatpacker meets Irish revolutionary. That's me. It's true, my passion is this issue of growing inequality, the ways in which we as a society have pulled apart in the last couple decades, where wealth has concentrated in fewer and fewer hands, where wages for most people have been flat or stagnant or fallen, where the middle-class standard of living is under assault. Those are the things that I feel passionate about. And I actually think that many of the protests that are emerging around the world and in the United States are drawing on that concern about extreme inequality. See, I got interested in taxes because I saw that taxing wealth might be one of the ways to reduce those extreme inequalities. When we've been taxing wealth in our society historically, we actually are more equal. In the years after World War I, and really up until the 70s, we were a much more equal society. And societies that don't tax wealth tend to be extremely unequal, even despotic. So that led me to an interesting conflict or fight in the year 2000. Congress was debating whether or not to keep the estate tax. Now think back a century ago. 100 years ago was the Gilded Age. It was the period of extreme inequality, the last time we were as unequal as we are today. And at that time, there was a much more robust discussion about the dangers of inequality to all that we care about. And even Andrew Carnegie, the industrialist, advocated for an inheritance tax as a way to break up the concentrations of wealth that were undermining our democratic society. So Congress in 1916 created an estate tax, an inheritance tax, what some people call a death tax. And it really stayed in place for a long time. Then, in the year 2000, Congress voted to abolish the estate tax. And the only reason it didn't go away is Bill Clinton was president, and he vetoed that repeal of the estate tax. But when George W. Bush was elected, he campaigned on eliminating the estate tax. So in the year 2000 in December, it looked like the estate tax was a goner. And it was in that day, it was in December 2000, when I was sitting in my office and I got a call on the phone, and a coworker said, Bill Gates is on the phone. Now, I have a bunch of jokers for coworkers, so this wouldn't be the first time. But it was Bill Gates Sr., the father of the founder of Microsoft. And he said, Chuck, I hear you're working on an effort to preserve the estate tax. I'm really behind that. The estate tax is the fairest tax we have. I think it would be un-American to lose it. How can I help? Okay. Here I am sitting in an office that has a very stained carpet. And the father of the richest man in the world is asking, how can he help? So I'm trying to stay cool. Okay. So Mr. Gates, we could set up meetings with members of Congress. I bet they would meet with you, and you could make your case. Or we could write some articles and op-eds. Or we could put out a petition and organize and get other millionaires and billionaires to stand up and say we should keep the estate tax. And he said, I'll do all those things. Sign me on. I'm running the Kids Foundation. Takes some time, but this is the most important thing to me. So a week later, I got back to him with this draft petition. And I said, well, Mr. Gates, I'll take this petition. I'll go out to some of the people I know, some business leaders, Arnold Hyatt and Jenny Ladd and Judy Wicks. And he said, great. I'll go out and I'll talk to Warren Buffett and Ted Turner and Paul Newman. And I was like, cool. You work your network. I'll work my network. So, fruits of that labor, February 2001, front page of the New York Times, there's a story. 120 millionaires and billionaires come out and publicly say, we got to keep the estate tax. It was a very interesting moment. All of a sudden, people were like, what's the estate tax? Why should we have it? Why do we have it in the first place? Who really pays it? Is it really farmers? It opened up a whole debate. And Bill and I, we wrote a book together, Wealth in Our Commonwealth, Why We Should Tax Inherited Fortunes. And we went out on the road. And that's where I got excited about the new story of how to talk about taxes and wealth. And I want to tell you 3 stories that I learned along the way. The first story, I'm actually sitting at home. It's 11 o'clock at night, and I'm on one of these conservative talk radio shows. And the host is beaming across New England, and he says, Chuck Collins is here. He's pro-death tax. Call him up and tell him why he's off his rocker, right? So the calls are coming in, and I'm sort of thinking, why have I done this to myself? But in comes a call from a guy named Charlie in Hillsborough, New Hampshire. And Charlie says, you know, Mr. Collins, I personally deeply disagree with you. And here's why. I started this company 30 years ago, and I've been working very hard, and nobody helped me. And I employ 30 people. And those people go home at the end of the day, and I stay here and work till the job is done. And I miss my kids' sporting events sometimes, and I miss their theater shows. And I've made huge sacrifices to my health and to my family. And I contribute a lot in my community. And I hate the idea that I'm going to have to pay some kind of death tax at the end of my life. And it's just going to go to some government that's going to waste the money. And I remember thinking, I don't really have anything to say to him. I just said, thanks for your call. And on came the next round of calls, you know, some of them screaming and yelling at me. You can imagine. But Charlie's story remained in my head. My next story is about a guy named Martin Rothenberg. Martin is a software technology entrepreneur. And when Bill Clinton vetoed the repeal of the estate tax in 2000, the White House called our office and said, can you send some business people to stand next to the president and make the argument about why we should keep the estate tax? So Martin went to Washington. He stood up at a press conference in the East Wing and he said, Mr. President, I'm here to say I should pay an estate tax. And here's why I should pay an estate tax. He said, Mr. President, I grew up in Syracuse. My family didn't have much money. In fact, we never went on a vacation. My parents were on the edge all the time. But I actually went to a decent elementary school. And I went to a library that was open on the weekends. And every time I went to that library, there was this librarian who knew me. And she said, Martin, I have a book for you. She knew I was interested in electronics. She said, I got this biography of Thomas Edison for you. And I got this book about electronic experiments you can do at home. This is Martin saying, I didn't have any money. My family didn't have any money, but I got a good education Somebody else paid for my education. And then he went to college. He got a full scholarship. He says, somebody paid for my education to go to college. And then I went into the field of technology, the new internet technologies that were built through public investments in research. Somebody else paid to build that infrastructure. And then I hired employees for my new company. Where did I get them? From the universities across the land. Somebody else paid to train my workers. And I transported my products over the public infrastructure. And one time somebody stole my patent, and I had to go to court to win back my intellectual property, and I won. But somebody else paid to build a legal system and a patent system. So he looks at President Clinton and he says, last year I sold my company for $30 million. And are you telling me I don't have a responsibility to pay back the society that made it almost entirely possible for me? No, I have an obligation to pay back the society so that some other kid born out there that's not wealthy, like I grew up, has a chance. Well, Bill Clinton was standing there. He's usually not at a loss for words, but he said, wow, how often do you hear a story like that? This is the best in America. So there's two stories. You have Charlie in Hillsborough telling an important truth about the importance of the individual, about the risks and sacrifices that people make. Real important. The individual matters. Creativity matters. What each of us does as individuals matter. And at the same time, here's Martin saying the context, the society, has a huge impact as well. Can we find a way to talk about taxes that holds those two complicated truths at the same time? Here's my third story. Bill Gates and I are on the road. We have our book. It's January. We're in Portland, Maine. Bill is refusing to wear a hat, which is a big problem because I'm supposed to take care of him and make sure he goes back to Seattle healthy. Worse, we're talking to 250 small business owners, most of whom have lobbied to get rid of the estate tax. So here we are in this room, and the audience is like this. I get up and I say, I get my part of the presentation. I make the case why we should keep the estate tax. You see, it raises a lot of money from those most able to pay, and it's a good incentive for charity, and it breaks up concentrations of wealth. And so I sit down. And Bill Sr. gets up. He's about a foot taller than me. He says, some of you here probably want to take the estate tax to the gallows. Before you do, let me plead clemency. If you have $10 million in this society, if you have $50 million in this society, if you have $50 billion in this society, and then he chuckled and said, oh, I only know one person who has that much money, my son. If you have that kind of wealth, you didn't do it alone. You got help. Our society created the fertile ground that made that wealth possible. And he went on to talk about how previous generations after World War II, paid taxes at much higher rates than we do today, and made investments that made it possible for this generation and others to have the prosperity that we have today. And Bill said, the reason why the wealthy should pay more in our society is they have disproportionately benefited from the commonwealth that we have all built together. And that if you are so fortunate that you have accumulated that kind of wealth, then you have a responsibility to recycle that opportunity. We all like recycling, right? Recycle that opportunity so that others can have a similar advantage. So there I am. I'm sitting next to Bill, looking out at the audience. They're no longer doing this. They're like misty-eyed, crying. I'm like, what is going on here? What's he got that I ain't got? Aside from a couple $1 billion. Oh, what's he got, right? But what he's doing is he's saying a basic truth. We're nothing without each other. We're nothing without the community. We're all benefiting We're all benefiting from things that happened before we were born. We're all benefiting from investments that other people made. We're not islands. And it's our responsibility to leave the world as clean as you found it. Except here we are, 8 years later. What's the national conversation? It's about austerity. It's about there's not enough money. We're going broke. Congress is saying we can't raise taxes on the wealthy. We have to cut budgets. And the kind of stories I read about every day are making me crazy. For 30 years we've been cutting taxes on the wealthy, but now we're talking about laying off teachers, firefighters. I read an article in Georgia. They're replacing firefighters. The proposal is to replace firefighters with free prison labor. We're disinvesting the Commonwealth. We're not making the investments we need to make in education and infrastructure for the next generation. What kind of society are we becoming? So I'm still at it. I'm still trying to organize. We've got this group, Wealth for the Common Good. We have like 3,000 millionaires and billionaires who are speaking out saying, hey, part of the solution here is to reverse the tax cuts on the wealthy, raise taxes on the wealthy. They sort of sound like my ancestor, Oscar Mayer. Do service to society. We have a group of patriotic millionaires who are out there saying, for the love of the country, tax us. You got Warren Buffett, who writes an op-ed saying, stop coddling the super rich. He tells the story of how his own taxes have been going down for 20 years, how he pays a smaller percentage of his income in taxes than his secretary. He's telling these stories. And yesterday, I see up on the web the 1% in support of the 99%. They're young people who are putting up their stories on the website saying, I'm in the 1%, but I support the 99%. I spend a lot of time interviewing business people. I love talking to entrepreneurs. I love hearing stories. And I'm moved by the stories of people who make huge sacrifices, who give all they have of their life force to building a business. And yet, I'm really moved by the people who tell those stories about the businesses they start, but it's like they see the web around them. They see the mentor, they see the librarian, they see the teacher, they see the roads, they see the matrix that helps make wealth creation possible. These are people who don't denigrate their own skills. They just see the enormity of the gift that we have all received, and they want to pass the gift along. So, remember Charlie? He's up there in New Hampshire somewhere. I wish I could talk to him. I wish I could find him. I'd say, Charlie, congratulations on the business you've built. Like a lot of small business people, you took risks, you went without, you made sacrifices, and your community is better for it. Your coworkers are better for it. We are better for it. Thank you. But Charlie, you're not on an island. You got help in 1,000 ways, probably invisible, probably that we took for granted, but you got help. If you have any doubt about that, try building your business in Honduras or Congo. Nothing against those countries. Those countries have qualities that we miss. But what we have in the United States is a particularly amazing infrastructure for enterprise and wealth creation. Previous generations taxed themselves to make the investments that make your business possible. Our obligation is to the next generation, to pay taxes, to help others make their way along. That's what I would say to Charlie. Thank you.